Mike Pence presiding over the vote to certify the presidential election just hours after that violent uprising in the halls of Congress. But what about Pence's future? How will history view his role in this week's events? Darius Johnson has more.
Chilling images captured inside the solemn halls of the United States Capitol as it was breached for the first time since 1814, this time by pro-Trump supporters. The Capitol raided and ransacked until an all-clear was given that allowed Vice President Pence to move forward with the certification process.
I never second-guessed his loyalty to the Constitution, and he proved it again yesterday.
Vice President Pence showed that he puts principle over politics and party, and I think it shows that he has a lot of longevity left in his political future.
This after the president made no public appearance except for on social media, creating a critical moment for the VP.
That certification process is critical. It's necessary going forward for the country, and it was something that the vice president stood up and completed, a task that needed to be done to kind of usher in that closure and that next step for the American people. This is a moment for him to demonstrate to the American people what that leadership is, to put principle over politics and to really kind of forge forward the end of the Donald Trump administration.
This is many in the Senate and House are now calling for the removal of the president by use of the 25th Amendment, Section 4.
It would take the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to activate this.
The amendment basically declares the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office.
That reportedly is looking less and less likely. Now, this week I also spoke with Indy Star columnist James Briggs about the VP's role and what's next for the Republican Party.
There were a lot of Republicans supporting the president and his messaging about the election along the way. Vice President Mike Pence had been publicly supportive until the last minute when he refused the president's requests to take some sort of step that the vice president didn't actually have the authority to do to try to overturn the election. But you also saw Senator Mike Braun take things pretty far in indulging the conspiracy that the election had been stolen. And nonetheless, I think it's a little bit encouraging that the vice president acknowledged that it was the constitutional thing to do, the only thing to do. He certainly could have tried to put on some sort of theater in support of the president, and he ultimately chose not to do that. So I think that's at least a small bit of redemption in the final moments of the Trump presidency for Vice President Mike Pence. I don't think he's shown a whole lot of courage during his term as vice president, but it was nice to see at least in that small way he stood up to the president.
Where do we go from here as a country after this?
It's hard to say. I think eventually things will calm down, but I think what I'm really interested in is the future of the Republican Party specifically. It looks like, a broader view, we're going to see Joe Biden become president. We're going to see Democrats control Congress. But I'm very interested to see what happens to the Republican Party now. You saw people like Senator Todd Young, who we should mention, made a very strong show of support for the Constitution and for conservative principles. I'm very interested to see whether folks like Senator Todd Young can take control of the Republican Party, use this as a moment to sort of redefine the direction that the party is moving in.
James Briggs from the Indy Star. All right, let's bring in the rest of our panel now. Jennifer Wagner, Robin Winston, Mike Murphy, Tony Samuel. Let's start with Jennifer Wagner, the former communications director for the Indiana Democrats. Jennifer, when you look at the many Hoosiers involved in this situation this week, how will history remember their roles in what happened?
Well, I think you're already seeing a lot of Republicans trying to put a more positive veneer on their last-minute changes of heart in this catastrophe that happened last Wednesday. I don't know how this will play out politically in the years to come. Certainly watching that footage, watching it over and over again, anyone who stood up for, stood alongside those people who broke down one of our most sacred institutions, broke into it, and committed acts of violence, I don't think will be remembered particularly well. But it remains to be seen. You know, we've got a few days left here, hopefully, and Donald Trump will fade off into the distance. I doubt he'll do that, but hope springs eternal, and maybe we can start rebuilding.
Mike, how will this past Wednesday and these Hoosiers be remembered by history?
Well, first of all, there's two Hoosier heroes that really became American heroes on Wednesday. One is Mike Pence for standing up to the president and putting the Constitution first. And the second is Todd Young, who stood on the porch of the Capitol and shouted down the protesters, the rioters, the insurrectionists. Those two men have great political careers ahead of them because of their courage. Now, Donald Trump, in 4 hours, destroyed his entire legacy of his entire life. As long as we have a republic, he will always be known for 4 hours on Wednesday. He will be the pariah of the American presidency throughout history.
Let's turn to Robin Winston now, who played a leading role in the Biden campaign's efforts here in Indiana. How does the new president begin to try and heal this country? Is that even possible right now, even as there's discussion now about a possible second impeachment in the House of Representatives?
I think Joe Biden's going to show the same characteristics and styles that he's had all along. He will be a tremendous leader. Look, we got, at this point, a little over a week to go before he becomes president. We have 300,000 people dead with the virus that we have to address immediately. We've got people waiting on stimulus checks that will help make a difference at their dining room or kitchen table. Those are the kind of real issues that we have to address. Yes, there was a lot of violence the other day, but Joe Biden throughout it. Watch how he even handled election night and how he handled proclaiming victory. Everything was, on his part, somewhat conciliatory that we had to work together. I believe deep inside, with a deep abiding faith, that he will demonstrate that.
Tony Samuel, you've long been a supporter of President Trump, part of his campaign as well. To what degree do these events stain his legacy? As Mike mentioned, Nikki Haley saying this week also the president's actions since Election Day will be harshly judged by history, in her words. What's your response?
Well, first of all, let me say it was a terrible, terrible thing that happened on Wednesday of this week. And thanks for having me and Robin on the news that evening. And I condemned it then and do as well now as harshly as possible. And so did President Trump. Now, mistakes were made on all sides. The Capitol Police wasn't prepared. There should have probably never been a rally that day. And I'm sure we're all wishing that there wasn't. The people that decided to breach the security gates and break in couldn't have been more wrong to do that. And as the president said, they'll face consequences and there should be very severe punishments. That kind of thing should never happen. My concern is that 99.999% and more of Trump supporters would never do that, and they care about issues. So getting to your question on how will this be a stain? Yes, it'll definitely be a stain on the president's legacy. But in time, and I think what we'll see from the Biden administration are policies that the majority of Americans don't agree with, and then we all need to get back as citizens and demand that we focus on issues, because we haven't focused on issues. We've focused on Donald Trump for the good or the bad for 4 years. We need to focus on issues. And that's why I've supported him and why people have supported him, because he's been right on so many issues and done a lot of good things for this country.
Tony, Jennifer, Mike, Robin, thank you all so much for sharing your perspective in this very difficult week. Coming up next, this Sunday in Focus, the latest on the coronavirus here in Indiana, from the vaccines to the plans to keep Hoosiers safe when March Madness comes to town.